Welcome to episode 0 of the History of Western Civilization. I am the Green Dragon, and I will be your host as we explore this history that was the foundation of the United States of America. But before we get started, I have to thank the Big Bear Owen Benjamin and to the bear community out there. Your overwhelming support has been an inspiration. So without further ado, here's the first episode. The reason why I started this channel and the reason why I think most of you are here today is the direction that this country is going in. All of our natural rights are under assault. For far too long, conservatives have really just sat by the wayside and let this happen. And it's getting to the point where we just can't wait anymore. We've allowed the three megaphones of society, media, entertainment, academia, to be run by extreme leftists. And it's really put our country in a detriment. I do see a glimmer of hope, and YouTube is playing a big part of that. YouTube has allowed the conservative voice to get out there. Owen Benjamin, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, Stefan Molyneux all have powerful voices on the internet. These great individuals and many others like them are really starting to take back the culture war from the leftists in media and entertainment. But academia, that's a whole nother ball game there. This is not just a matter in colleges and universities, it is also in our primary and secondary education. This is the purpose of this channel, is to help correct that. I believe a lot of the country's problems stem from a lack of historical knowledge. Many do not understand how unique and how special the United States really is, how it is the exception to the rule. Those of us born after World War II are really spoiled. Many demand for policies that would destroy the essence of this country. When this country has lifted more out of poverty than all other nations combined, people want to tear it down because it's unfair that some people are rich and other people are poor. When you understand history, you understand that we need to protect free speech. We need to protect gun ownership. We need to protect life, liberty, property, limited government. So this is the purpose of this channel. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at prehistory. And what is prehistory? Well, what is history? History is events of the past, but the key ingredient is that we have to have a record. We have to have some sort of written record. Anything before that, any sort of written record, is going to be prehistory. And that's really what we're going to discuss today. The prehistory of Western civilization. That's really going to be broken down into two parts, the Greek civilization and the Israeli civilization. In Greece, we're going to take a look at the Minoan civilization, and we're going to take a look at the Israeli civilization, starting with Abraham and going through the Exodus, and we're going to examine the archaeological evidence that does support the Exodus story. So sit back, grab a beverage, I'm a tea drinker myself, and let's get started. I know earlier that I said that I was going to be dealing with history before writing, but that's only partially true. Many of these civilizations had writing, we just can't read it. There are 4 languages that we're going to be dealing with today: Egyptian hieroglyphs, Cretan hieroglyphs, Linear A, and Linear B. Cretan hieroglyphs and Linear A are associated with the Minoan civilization. Cretan hieroglyphs were associated with the Minoan civilization from about 2100 to about 1700 BCE, while Linear A was from about 2500 to about 1450 BCE. Linear B is associated with the Mycenaean civilization and is flourishing about 1450 to about 1200 BCE, but that's really going to be covered in maybe the next episode. Egyptian hieroglyphs are the cornerstone of understanding ancient Middle East history. With the arid climate of Egypt, along with the medium of stone, has preserved a vast amount of sources available to us. Because of this, all other histories from the Middle East are tied back to ancient Egypt. Of these 4 sources, only Egyptian hieroglyphs and Linear B have been deciphered. Cretan hieroglyphs and Linear A still remain undeciphered. This makes it a little difficult to piece a timeline together for the events we're about to discuss. First, let's give a little background information to the rise of these civilizations. Let's go back to about 5000 BCE. This is the time that the first civilizations start to pop up. And why did they pop up? The key to it is food. Once farming developed, enough food was produced to allow others to do something other than the procurement of sustenance. This led to the development of the city-state, which ultimately led to the rise of civilizations. One of the most important regions to this is what is referred to as the Fertile Crescent. This area is Mesopotamia, the Levant, and and down the Nile. This region is home to some of the most important domesticated plants and animals in the rise of human civilization. Among these are the wheat, barley, flax, chickpea, and lentil, and 4 out of the 5 most important domesticated animals: the cow, the goat, the sheep, and the pig. The 5th most important domesticated animal, the horse, is located nearby in the Central Plains of Asia. In Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond explains how this is essential to the rise of civilization. With Eurasia on an east-west plane, climate at the same latitudes are going to be very similar. This allowed for the easily transplant of plants and animals. Not only did plants and animals go back and forth, but so did ideas, people. This close contact allowed the ingredients of civilizations to come together across the region. The first real civilization is Sumer, here in Lower Mesopotamia. Ironically, this area happens to be the location of the Garden of Eden. Through the centuries, different empires would form in this region. In 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad established the Akkadian Empire, the first Semitic-speaking empire in the world. Mesopotamia is also the birthplace of Abraham. The first civilization important to our story are the Minoans. They were a sea trading civilization that began about 2600 BCE. At some point, probably a long time before 2600 BCE, a group migrated from Egypt to Crete. Crete was the mainland for the Minoan civilization, but it also held some of the islands in the Aegean, and it also seems it had a tyrannical dominance of the mainland as well. On the island of Crete, there are numerous palace-like structures that are tied to the Minoan. The largest of these is Knossos. Having been to the palace myself, I can tell you it is certainly a large structure, approximately 4 square miles. It may be 4 square miles in area, but it is one continuous building. This construction leads to a labyrinth-like building that all lead to this massive courtyard at the top. Just off of the large courtyard is the first throne room in all of Europe. Besides this massive structure, the other prominent feature in all of Knossos are bulls. Whether it is bull horns or large frescoes of full bull, the images of bulls are everywhere. The Moans seem to have worshipped bulls. Along with their bull worship, there is something that is referred to as bull jump, a ritualistic sport where literally a man jumps over and does a backflip over a charging bull. While this may seem unrealistic, the only real records we have of such an event are through artifacts such as frescoes and statues depicting the event. A lot of what we also know about the Minoan civilization comes from Akrotiri, a preserved Minoan town on the island of Thera. Akrotiri can be described as Minoan Pompeii, with many of its preserved frescoes that preserved life in Minoan civilization. Some of the most famous frescoes from this town are the fisherman, the boxing youth, the blue monkey, and probably the most famous is the voyage in the town. What this fresco is depicting is a long voyage from what seems to be Avaris, arriving in Thera, which is a matching description of the fabled Atlantis. More on those two towns, Avaris and Akrotiri, a little bit later. And let's do a brief recap on the Minoan civilization. You have a seafaring trading civilization with domination over the mainland. You have a large labyrinth-like structure with large bulls everywhere. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it's the Minotaur myth. In this ancient Greek legend, Theseus, son of Aegeus, king of Athens, volunteered to kill the beasts who have been terrorizing his people. Every 7 or 9 years, it depends on the translation, 7 Athenian maids and youths were to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. Before leaving home, he made a promise to his father. If he were to survive the attack, he would use white sails when entering the harbor. If he were killed, the crew were to use black sail. Unfortunately, Theseus forgot of this, and when he was entering the harbor, black sails were being used, and Aegeus threw himself into the sea, and that's why it's called the Aegean Sea. For hundreds of years, the Minoan civilization would dominate the area. By 2000 BCE, Knossos had approximately 18,000 inhabitants. And about 1600 BC, the Mycenaean civilization started to gain power. The Mycenaean civilization is centered on the mainland, but we're really going to start looking at them a little bit later. For now, we're only going to look at them in the context of their battle with the Minoans. Several times while Knossos was inhabited, it was destroyed or burned, or a little bit of both. There's a line of burnt bricks easily seen throughout Knossos. This is about the time that the Minoans start to lose their power. And it may not just be from other civilizations in the region. It could be geologic. For one of their large trading hubs, Thera is sitting on a large volcano. Thera, or Santorini as it's called today, is a large volcano that erupted anywhere from about 1400 to about 1600 BCE. This eruption is the largest in all of human history. There may be a few more that exude more debris, but this is the largest explosive eruption in all of human history. The sound from this eruption circled the Earth some 10 to 12 times. Like all eruptions, there's going to be some pre-eruption activity in the form of earthquake. It seems that this volcano gave plenty of time before it erupted, because at the one buried town on the island, no bodies were discovered. As a sea trading civilization, it would have been easy for them to disperse. My theory is this is actually the Philistines. Most scholars believe that the Philistines were actually an Aegean group that had settled there very recently before the conquest of Canaan. So it is possible that the Philistines are actually the refugees from Thera. A comparison of the pre and the post eruption Thera just shows how destructive this eruption was. The ash plume went some 19 to 22 miles high. It released over 100 cubic kilometers of debris and completely buried Akrotiri, a town on Thera, with approximately 300 feet of debris. This massive eruption led to the collapse of the Minoan civilization, but it also led to the 10 plagues of Egypt. As I mentioned earlier, Egyptian sources are used to date other sources from other civilizations in the period. This is also true of the Bible. Scholars have connected a Shishak mentioned in 1 Kings to that of the Egyptian pharaoh Shoshank. Then they used the Bible to count backwards to the Exodus, look for the archaeological evidence in Egypt at that time, and don't find anything, and then they say, well, the Exodus is a false story. In 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 25, it happened in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. The problem is when you actually look at Shoshank, the Egyptian pharaoh's what records are left, it does not mention Jerusalem at all. It mentions cities around, but not Jerusalem, which would have been the biggest prize in the area. So it's pretty clear that this is not the same person. So modern day archaeologists are actually looking in the wrong place for the discovery of the Exodus. This timeline also makes sense for the Ramses II Exodus theory, where Ramses II is the pharaoh of the Exodus. We've all seen Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments, but is this really the face-off? Scholars point to other evidence to support this theory, and really looking at Exodus chapter 1 verse 11. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities of Pithom and Ramses. The town of Ramses is located in Goshen, where the Israelites did settle when they were in Egypt, but there is no evidence for any Semitic peoples living in that city at the time. So scholars are like, no, it didn't happen. However, if we go back to Genesis chapter 47 verse 11, we'll see this also mentioned as Ramses. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. It's obvious that Ramses cannot be both the Ramses of Joseph and of the Exodus. The Bible that we know today was written down about the 3rd century BCE, maybe as far back as 5th century BC, but around the time of the Babylonian captivity. At this time, Ramses II would have already reigned and would have already been the most powerful pharaoh in the history of Egypt. If I were to ask you what city the Dutch founded on Manhattan Island, you would most likely answer New York, but you'd really be incorrect on that, because they really founded New Amsterdam. It was later changed to New York when the English took over in the 17th century. One of the scholars really questioning this timeline and really putting some new information and new ideas out there is David Rawl. He's got some really fascinating documentaries and lectures that I'll post on here. He also teamed up with Timothy Mahoney to produce the documentary Patterns of Evidence. Rawl actually connects Shoshank to Ramses in a lecture that I'll provide the link below. It's a pretty convincing argument. I'm not 100% sold, but it does make a lot of sense. We're going to do a Sunday school history lesson here. Abraham, he was born in Ur in Mesopotamia. In Genesis chapter 12, God speaks to Abraham telling him to move to Canaan. It's Abraham's grandson Joseph that would be sold into slavery into Egypt, rise up the ranks and become one of the most powerful men in Egypt. And there's some interesting archaeological evidence for Pharaoh Amenemhat III. His bust has worry lines and his ears turned out like he's listening to his people plea for help. This is very very unusual for the period, for all of ancient Egypt for that matter. During this time, there was a large concentration of power, and contemporary sources point to a 7-year cycle of good flooding and bad flooding that would have caused famine. This all points to the biblical story of Joseph. It's obvious that the time of Joseph would have been a time period in Egypt. Joseph put in a plan that would conserve for 7 years during the good time, so the Pharaoh actually had all that grain. During the famine period, that grain was traded for money, for power, for land, that sort of thing. By the end of the famine, the Pharaoh had accumulated a lot of power. You may ask, that's just speculation. That could be anybody. Here's the thing. During this time, a large canal was built that would siphon off some of the Nile's water that could be used for irrigation. This canal diverted to a large ancient lake. On this canal was Amenemhat III's pyramid. The name of this canal? Bar Yusuf, or Joseph's Canal, is still called that today, and I really saved the best for last. As the Bible states in Exodus chapter 1 of Pi Ramses, well, right underneath that is a town called Avaris. It's from a much earlier time frame. In the town of Avaris, there is a lot of archaeological evidence to support a Semitic tribe of people living there. Archaeologists state this could be one of the largest cities in all of ancient history. Located in this town is a large Semitic house that would have been typical of the area that they were from in Canaan, with 12 pillars in a large courtyard and 12 tombs out back. The grandest one of them all is a pyramid with a large Semitic man sitting inside with a multicolored coat. Many archaeologists will say that there's no need to look here because you're looking in the wrong period and can't be them. And the only reason they say, well, it's the wrong period. They're not really open to the idea of working outside their box, that their chronology may be wrong. While we know all this information about Amenemhat, we really don't know when he's from. Scholars are fairly sure that he is from the 12th dynasty and anywhere from the 18th and 19th century BCE to the 17th century BCE. And we all know this story. Then the Pharaoh dies, new Pharaoh comes in, doesn't know Joseph, and the Israelites are enslaved. Then comes along Moses and the 10 plagues. Now, this information comes from a documentary called Exodus Decoded, produced by Simca Djokovic and James Cameron. He also connects the Thera Eruption to the 10 plagues of Egypt. And let's just go over those real quick. Number 1, the Nile turns red. Number 2, you got frogs. 3, you got biting insects and lice. 4, you have other animals that are coming in. 5, you had dead livestock. 6 is boils. 7 is thunder of hail and fire. Number 8 is locusts. Number 9 is 3 days of darkness. And number 10 is the angel of death. The Nile turning red actually puts off a chain reaction for the next few of them that are going to happen. And it all ties back to the Thera Eruption. And there's actually been some modern day occurrences of this happening. 1984 in Lake Monoun and in 1986 in Lake Nyos, both in Cameroon. Earthquakes released CO2 into the water that was highly dissolved iron, and it oxidized and it rusted basically and turned red. This wiped out any oxygen that was in the water, and anything that could leave the water left the water. Everything that was left in the water died. And what's going to be a common animal that's going to be living in water that can easily get away? Frogs. What do a lot of those animals eat? Insects, lice, that sort of thing. So the insects and lice are going to leave the water, but there's nothing to eat them, so there's going to be infestation of that as well. Then around these two lakes, the animals started to die. A couple days later, boils started to form on people and animals. So these first 6 can be easily explained by looking at modern events. The exact same thing happened here, and it can all be easily explained by the earthquakes being caused by the Thera Eruption, or the pre-events of the eruption anyway. The next 3 are explained by the eruption itself. Hail that falls to the earth and catches fire is not an uncommon phenomenon when you're dealing with large volcanoes. The volcanoes shoot hot gas and fire up into the atmosphere, and it cools and condenses and it falls to the earth, and it's still on fire. It's called lapillo. The eruption would also cause some atmospheric changes that would have resulted in the locust swarming. The ash plume from the volcano could have blocked the sun out for 3 days. Genesis chapter 10 describes a darkness that could be felt. This could easily describe ash falling to the earth. And for the last plague, we'll go back to Cameroon in 1986. October 21st, 1986 to be exact. There was a landslide that disrupted the lake and caused the CO2 gas to be released. CO2 gas is heavier than air, so it kind of hugged the ground. But anything that was low to the ground suffocated and died by morning. And the Egyptian male, firstborn male, he had a privileged position in his household. So he got to sleep in the special bed, which is situated just above the floor level. So this is how I believe actually the Exodus story occurred, and tying it back to the Thera Eruption. You may think this takes God out of the equation, but I disagree. God knew what was going to happen. The choices that Moses made during his life put him in the position to be called on by God. And when he was called on by God, he answered. He could have said no, but he answered the call and went back to Egypt. Now, there is a little controversy for the Exodus Pharaoh himself, even in this discussion. David Rawle points to a Dudamos, who was the last pharaoh of the 13th dynasty, at least that's what he says, and it's dated to about 1447 BCE. What's interesting about this is after this, there was a period called the Hyksos period, in which a group called the Hyksos from probably modern-day Syria came in and conquered the land without striking a blow, and that's a quote from Josephus. This would make sense if Pharaoh's army was at the bottom of the Red Sea. One Egyptian source says that during the reign of Dudamos, a blast of God smote us, and God in the singular, which is unique to the Hebrew or Israeli civilization. Yakovich, he actually points to Ahmosis I from about 1500 BCE, according to him. There's a stela that describes events very similar to the Exodus, and osmosis means brother of Moses. So as you can see with these two dates of 1447 and 1500 BCE, it really fits within that time frame of the Thera explosion. The second half of the Exodus decoded documentary that's below contains a documentary on the search for Mount Sinai, a fascinating addition to this. Won't get into it too much, but it is in Saudi Arabia at Al Jawala. There's even archaeological evidence that supports the conquest of Canaan. Patterns of evidence goes into great detail into the archaeological evidence all the way from the arrival to the multiplication, through the slavery, to the Exodus, through the punishment and the conquest. But there are many other theories that are out there. What's safe to say is that the current relationship between ancient Egypt and Israel, based on this Shishak and Shoshank connection, is just wrong. There is archaeological evidence that supports the entire story of the Exodus. So we're going to stop right here for this lesson at about 1300 BCE. The Minoan civilization has completely collapsed. The Mycenaean civilization is starting to gain real power in Greece. The Israelites are entering Canaan. Ancient Egypt has yet to reach its zenith, and the Babylonian Empire controls Mesopotamia. On the next episode, we're going to focus on the Mycenaean civilization up through the Great Miracle. Thank you for listening. I am the Green Dragon. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and share. Let's really start to get the true history of